In January 2016, Detective Deacon Thorne walked into Inkwell Tattoo to check out a break-in. At 45, Deacon had been a police officer for 22 years. Everyone knew him as tough, thorough, and someone who always solved his cases. With his broad shoulders and grey-streaked hair, he had a presence that made people nervous. He had seen thousands of crime scenes before, and this one seemed like just another robbery. He didn't know that this simple case would change his life forever. Freya Ellis, 27, was different from most victims Deacon met. Instead of being afraid or angry at the police, she stood calmly among her broken shop, shattered glass, knocked over furniture, and torn artwork. Her tattooed arms were crossed as she answered his questions clearly and directly. When Deacon asked why she didn't have better security, Freya didn't get defensive. She simply explained how hard it was to pay for expensive security systems while raising a child alone. She broke down her monthly costs in a way that showed she had thought everything through carefully. Deacon was surprised by how smart and practical she was, which didn't match what he expected from a young woman with bright blue hair and tattoos. The case itself was simple. The thieves left fingerprints, footprints in spilled ink, and were caught on a nearby security camera. Deacon had everything he needed to close the case. But 3 days later, he found himself driving past Inkwell during lunch. He slowed down when he saw Freya already back at work, fixing up her damaged shop. On February 10th, Deacon went back to Inkwell claiming he had follow-up questions. The truth was, he couldn't stop thinking about Freya. She was polite but distant as she answered his questions and signed some papers. Before leaving, Deacon noticed a drawing on the wall. A phoenix bird that was dying, turning to ash, and being reborn all at the same time. When he commented on it, Freya's mood changed. She told him she drew it herself after her boyfriend died from a drug overdose while she was pregnant. She didn't tell the story looking for pity, but Deacon felt a connection that caught him off guard. By late February, Deacon ran out of real reasons to check on the case. The teenage thieves had been caught, and all the paperwork was done. Still, he went back to Inkwell on February 27th, bringing information about a program that could help pay for the damage. He could have sent this by email or had another officer deliver it, but he wanted to see Freya again. During this visit, he met MIA, Freya's 3-year-old daughter. The little girl had been playing in a corner of her mother's workspace. She came out holding a juice box and tried to shake Deacon's hand like a grown-up. When she accidentally squeezed the juice box, purple liquid spilled all over Deacon's case files. Freya tensed up immediately, like she expected Deacon to be angry. But instead, he laughed, a real, genuine laugh that surprised both Freya and himself. As he helped clean up the mess, telling MIA it was okay, he noticed Freya watching him with new interest. That evening, driving home to the big house he shared with his wife Vivian, Deacon kept thinking about what happened. Vivian wasn't home yet, normal for a Tuesday. As a pharmaceutical executive, she often worked late. Years ago, this bothered Deacon, but now it was just their normal life. They shared a house and occasionally meals, but not much else of the connection they once had. Throughout March, Deacon made up more reasons to visit Inkwell. He told himself he was just being thorough, checking if the compensation paperwork was moving along, seeing if his security suggestions were being used. Each visit lasted longer than the last. They talked about Freya's artwork, how she got into tattooing after leaving art school when she got pregnant. Vivian never asked about his late nights. Their conversations were mostly about practical things, bills, house repairs, and brief updates about friends they rarely saw together anymore. She didn't notice the small changes in her husband, how he started caring more about his appearance before work, checked his phone more often, or began listening to the indie rock music that played at Inkwell. By early April, Deacon stopped pretending he was there for work reasons. He would stop by Inkwell after hours, bringing coffee or food from the Vietnamese restaurant Freya liked. At first, she kept her distance, but slowly she started sharing more personal things, her worry that MIA would feel different from kids with two parents, her struggle to be respected as a real artist, her dream of opening a bigger studio someday. Learning about Freya's life fascinated Deacon. Her world was so different from his orderly, predictable life. Her challenges, money problems, raising a child alone, building an art career, were nothing like his experiences. Yet she faced them with strength and honesty that made his careful, structured life suddenly seem empty. Without fully realizing it, Deacon started measuring his days not by work or home duties, but by when he might see Freya again. By April 2016, Deacon visited Inkwell regularly after his shifts ended. He always came in normal clothes, not his uniform. Sometimes he brought food, sometimes just coffee. The first big lie happened on a rainy Tuesday evening when Freya asked about his home life. The question made him pause. Then he told her he was separated from his wife and living in a small apartment near the police station. The lie came out easily, which surprised him. Freya didn't ask for more details. Instead, she told him about Mia's father, how they met in art school, his drug problems, and how she found out she was pregnant just weeks before he died of an overdose. As she talked, Deacon realized how different their lives were, yet how comfortable he felt sitting in her tattoo shop after hours, watching her draw. These late-night talks became more frequent throughout May. Deacon would arrive after Freya had put MIA to bed in the apartment above the shop. They would talk for hours about everything, his police cases, the ones he could share, her difficult customers, books, and music. Despite their age difference, they connected in ways that filled empty spaces in both their lives. On May 15th, Deacon spent his day off at an arcade, playing games to win enough tickets for a purple stuffed elephant. He had seen MIA looking at it in a toy store window earlier that week. When he brought it to Inkwell that evening, Mia's face lit up with happiness. She hugged the elephant tight, then wrapped her small arms around Deacon's legs to thank him. After putting MIA to bed, Freya came back downstairs looking at Deacon differently. The careful distance she had kept suddenly disappeared as she stepped forward and kissed him. This quick, impulsive moment changed everything between them. The kiss stunned Deacon, awakening feelings he thought were long dead after years of routine marriage. When Freya started to say sorry, he stopped her and pulled her close again. What started as an impulse quickly turned into passion. That night was the beginning of their physical relationship, crossing a line Deacon had promised himself he would never cross. In the weeks that followed, Deacon became careless. He left his wedding ring in his desk drawer at work. He took calls from Vivian while at Freya's place, stepping outside with excuses about work calls. Once, he forgot to remove family photos from his car before picking up Freya for dinner, quickly shoving them into the glove compartment when she approached. Each small lie made the next one easier, building up a wall of deception that grew higher every day. By June, Deacon lived 3 separate lives. At work, he kept up his image as the department's most professional detective, though his colleagues noticed he paid less attention to cases that once would have consumed him. At home with Vivian, he went through their routines with cold politeness, avoiding talks beyond necessary household matters. He made excuses about stressful cases to explain why he seemed distant. But with Freya, he was alive in a way he hadn't felt in years, laughing, sharing thoughts he'd never told anyone, feeling desire that had been missing from his marriage for a long time. Deacon justified his actions in his mind. After 22 years of seeing the worst of humanity, of sacrificing his own happiness for a thankless job, didn't he deserve this? Wasn't he entitled to feel something real again? These justifications came easily in the warmth of Freya's small apartment, where MIA now called him D and saved drawings for him from her daycare. As summer approached, these excuses became his mantra, drowning out his conscience which grew quieter each day. Freya never questioned his story about being separated. She accepted his vague excuses about complicated divorce proceedings and shared property that made the separation hard to finalize. She had no reason to doubt him. He seemed genuinely committed to spending time with her and MIA. Rex Calloway had been Deacon's partner for 7 years. He knew Deacon's habits and how he worked on cases. By mid-June, Rex couldn't ignore the changes in his partner anymore. Deacon checked his phone constantly, smiled at text messages, and disappeared during lunch breaks without explanation. His case notes, once detailed and thorough, were now rushed and incomplete. During a stakeout on June 23rd, Rex finally confronted him. "Something's going on with you." "Has been for months," Rex said, eyes fixed on the warehouse they were watching. "Whatever it is, it's affecting your work." Deacon immediately denied it, his voice harsh. Nothing's going on. And my work is fine. We've been partners for 7 years, Rex continued. You've never missed details like you have lately. You've never disappeared without saying where you're going. And you sure as hell have never smiled at your phone like a teenager. The accusation hung between them in the small space of their unmarked car. Deacon's response came suddenly and angrily. Back off, Rex. My personal life is none of your business. If you've got complaints about my work, file them officially. The outburst shocked Rex. In 7 years, he had never seen Deacon lose control like that. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, damaging a partnership built on years of trust. They finished the stakeout without speaking again. The next day, Rex requested a different partner for an upcoming surveillance operation, claiming scheduling conflicts. Both men knew it was a lie. On June 30th, Deacon arrived home to find Vivian waiting in the living room, unusual for a weeknight. She had opened a bottle of wine and ordered dinner from their favorite restaurant. Her smile, something he rarely saw directed at him these days, immediately worried him. I've been thinking, she said, pouring him a glass of wine. We've both been so busy lately, so disconnected. I booked us a trip to Cabo for our anniversary next month. A full week, July 15th to 22nd. I've already cleared it with your captain. The glass felt heavy in Deacon's hand as his carefully separated worlds suddenly threatened to crash together. He had promised to take MIA to the aquarium that week. He and Freya had been planning a weekend drive to the coast. His mind raced for an excuse, but Vivian had been thorough, eliminating all his usual escape routes. That's quite a surprise, he managed, his voice strained. That's the point, Vivian said, misunderstanding his hesitation. We need this, Deacon. It's been years since we've taken a real vacation together. As she talked about resort details and flight times, Deacon felt panic rising. For months, he had balanced his double life with careful planning and lies. Now, as his wife smiled at him across their dining room table, he realized how shaky that balance had become. One wrong move, one unexpected change, and everything could fall apart around him. By mid-July 2016, Deacon's relationship with Freya had grown beyond passion into something resembling a family connection. During his week in Cabo with Vivian, his thoughts constantly drifted to Freya and MIA in Seattle. He checked his phone whenever Vivian wasn't looking, making his marriage feel even more like an empty shell. After returning, Deacon became more involved in Freya's daily life. She asked his opinion about preschools for MIA and introduced him to her friends as someone important. These simple acts pulled Deacon deeper into a family fantasy that felt surprisingly right to him. In late July, Freya received a formal complaint from her landlord. The neighbors had filed noise complaints about Mia's running and playing. The letter mentioned previous warnings and threatened eviction. Freya looked worried as she showed Deacon, knowing her tattoo shop income wasn't enough to easily find a new place with her poor credit history. Without thinking it through, Deacon offered financial help. He had savings that Vivian didn't monitor from his overtime pay. He wrote a $3,000 check for a security deposit on a new apartment if needed. This money tied them together in ways beyond emotional and physical. Freya hesitated but finally accepted, her practical need overcoming her pride. Deacon didn't realize how careless he had become until early August, when Freya mentioned her friend Imani wanted to meet him for dinner. Imani had always been suspicious of Deacon, asking uncomfortable questions about his past. The dinner never happened. The day before, Imani came to Inkwell early, before Deacon's usual arrival. She looked serious as she told Freya something important. Imani's cousin had seen Deacon at an expensive Seattle restaurant with an elegant older woman. They were clearly celebrating something, drinking champagne with wedding rings visible. That evening, Deacon found Freya waiting with red eyes from crying. The confrontation was immediate and intense. Freya demanded the truth about everything Imani had told her. Caught off guard, Deacon tried denying it before finally admitting he was still married, though he claimed the relationship was essentially over. When asked why he had lied for months, he had no good answer. After hours of arguing, with Freya threatening to end things, Deacon made a promise he never intended to keep. he would leave Vivian by the end of the year. He explained that holidays made timing complicated, along with financial considerations and family expectations. But he would do it, he swore, because Freya and MIA were what he truly wanted. To make his lie more convincing, Deacon claimed he was already looking at apartments for them. He described features he knew Freya would love: a studio space with natural light for her artwork, a bedroom for MIA with built-in bookshelves, near a good preschool. These fabricated details replaced Freya's anger with cautious hope. By night's end, she had conditionally forgiven him, choosing to believe in the future he invented. This close call should have warned Deacon, but instead he became more determined to maintain his double life. He grew more careful about where he went with Vivian, avoiding restaurants near Freya's neighborhood. He kept his two phones strictly separated. But mistakes were inevitable. In mid-August, Vivian found turquoise earrings in Deacon's jacket pocket while preparing it for dry cleaning. When she questioned him that evening, Deacon quickly invented a story about finding them at a crime scene, claiming he had forgotten to log them as evidence. The excuse was flimsy, but Vivian accepted it without further questions, her trust still fundamentally intact despite their growing distance. Later that night, as Vivian slept beside him, Deacon felt unexpected guilt. Her easy acceptance of his explanation revealed a trust he no longer deserved. For a brief moment, he considered waking her to confess everything. But by morning, he had recommitted to both relationships, unable to choose one over the other. By September, Freya had begun to believe in the future Deacon promised. His ongoing lies about apartment hunting and divorce preparations made her feel secure enough to take a bold step. On September 15th, she decided to surprise him at work, bringing his favorite lunch from their Vietnamese restaurant. She dressed carefully and brought a drawing MIA had made for D. When she walked into the police station, heads turned. With her blue hair, tattoos, and youthful appearance, Freya stood out dramatically in the conservative police environment. Deacon was at his desk when a colleague pointed out the woman at the front desk. The moment he saw Freya standing there smiling with a takeout bag, his carefully separated worlds collided. Panic overwhelmed him. His colleagues were watching, curious about the striking young woman asking for him by name. Without thinking about how it would appear to Freya, Deacon approached her with cold formality, as if she were just a witness or informant. He barely acknowledged the lunch, quickly guided her outside, and spoke in clipped, professional tones. The coldness in his eyes made Freya physically step back once they were outside. The pain of his rejection was written clearly on her face. What had been intended as a loving gesture had turned into humiliation. Later at Inkwell, their argument exposed the fundamental imbalance in their relationship. Deacon had all the power, deciding when they could meet, what was safe, how their relationship could be expressed. Freya could only accept his terms or walk away entirely. The realization that she was essentially powerless in the relationship she had put so much hope in left her devastated. For the first time, she began to question whether Deacon would ever actually leave his wife for her and MIA. By October 2016, the fragile balance of Deacon's double life was beginning to crumble. After the incident at the police station, his relationship with Freya had become strained. Her trust in him was damaged, but she still clung to his promises about their future together. Deacon worked harder to maintain the relationship, bringing small gifts for MIA and spending more evenings at their apartment. The effort seemed to be working. Freya's doubts gradually faded as Deacon renewed his promises about leaving Vivian. On October 14th, Deacon left Seattle for what he told Freya was a 3-day training seminar in Portland. The truth was more complicated. Vivian had arranged a couples retreat at Scarmania Lodge in the Columbia River Gorge, a last attempt to reconnect in their increasingly distant marriage. Deacon couldn't find a way to refuse without raising suspicions, especially after the incident with the earrings. He reluctantly agreed, telling himself it would be the last time he would need to pretend with Vivian. During the drive to the lodge, Vivian tried to engage Deacon in conversation about their relationship. She had noticed his emotional absence over the past months and wanted to understand what had changed between them. Deacon gave vague answers about work stress and approaching middle age. His mind was elsewhere, calculating when he could safely text Freya without Vivian noticing. The first day of the retreat passed with awkward couples activities and forced conversation. Deacon maintained the minimum level of engagement necessary to avoid confrontation. That evening, while Vivian was in the shower, he quickly texted Freya, reassuring her that the training was going well and he missed her. He didn't realize these would be the last normal moments before everything fell apart. On the second day, October 15th, MIA woke with a high fever. Freya, initially unconcerned, gave her children's fever medication and expected improvement. By afternoon, Mia's condition had worsened, her temperature climbing to 103 degrees Fahrenheit, her small body alternating between chills and sweat. Freya called Deacon repeatedly, leaving increasingly urgent voicemails. He had silenced his phone during the formal dinner the retreat had organized, unaware of the emergency unfolding back in Seattle. As Mia's fever continued to rise, Freya called her pediatrician, who advised going to the emergency room immediately. Alone and frightened, with MIA now lethargic in her arms, Freya hailed a taxi to Seattle Children's Hospital. The doctors quickly determined MIA had a severe case of pneumonia, requiring immediate treatment and admission. As medical staff worked on stabilizing the little girl, Freya continued calling Deacon, desperate for support during the terrifying ordeal. By 11 p.m., with MIA finally admitted to a room and on 4 antibiotics, Freya had called Deacon 17 times without response. In desperation, she called the Seattle Police Department, asking for Detective Thorne, saying it was an emergency regarding his daughter. The overnight desk sergeant, confused but recognizing the urgency in her voice, tried Deacon's work number, then referred the call to Rex Calloway, still listed as Deacon's partner despite their recent distance. Rex, piecing together the fragments of information he had observed over the past months, immediately understood the situation. He called Deacon's personal phone. Vivian, awake and worried by her husband's late return from what was supposed to be a short walk to clear his head, answered the call. Rex, caught off guard, asked to speak with Deacon on an urgent matter. When Vivian explained he wasn't in the room, Rex made a split-second decision that would change everything. He told Vivian that a woman named Freya Ellis was trying to reach Deacon because her daughter MIA was in the hospital with pneumonia. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what seemed like minutes before Vivian quietly asked who Freya was, and why she would call Deacon for a child's medical emergency. Rex, realizing he had just exposed his partner's deception, simply said Deacon should call the hospital as soon as possible, and hung up. Deacon, walking the grounds of the lodge in the cold October night, returned to find Vivian sitting motionless in the dark hotel room. The confrontation was brief but devastating. Without emotion, she told him about Rex's call, asked if Freya was his mistress, and if MIA was his child. When Deacon stammered that MIA wasn't his biological daughter, Vivian's laugh was hollow and bitter. She told him to go, that they would discuss divorce when he returned to Seattle. The 3-hour drive back to Seattle was a blur for Deacon. He arrived at the hospital around 3 a.m. to find Freya sitting beside Mia's bed, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, her posture rigid with exhaustion and anger. When she saw him, her expression shifted from relief to fury. In the quiet hospital corridor, their confrontation reached its breaking point. Freya demanded to know why he hadn't answered her calls during the most frightening night of her life. Deacon, already emotionally raw from Vivian's discovery, made the fatal mistake of telling the truth, that he had been at a couple's retreat with his wife. The revelation that he had been actively working on his marriage while promising Freya he was planning to leave Vivian was the final betrayal. As Freya's voice rose with anger, Deacon tried to explain, fumbling through excuses about complex emotions and genuine feelings for both women. His clumsy explanations only made things worse, especially when he inadvertently revealed that he had been lying from the very beginning. He had never been separated, never looking for apartments, never planning to leave Vivian until now, when he had no choice. Freya, her voice shaking, told him to leave and never contact her or MIA again. When Deacon tried to resist, hospital security approached, drawn by the escalating confrontation. Freya turned away from him, walking back into Mia's room and closing the door with quiet finality. By early November, the carefully constructed compartments of Deacon's life had collapsed entirely. Vivian moved out of their house, taking half their joint savings and filing for divorce. At work, the fallout was equally severe. Rex formally requested a new partner, citing irreconcilable professional differences. Worse, an internal affairs investigation had been opened after a review of Deacon's recent cases revealed falsified reports and timesheets, his attempts to create time for his relationship with Freya. Suspended pending the investigation, Deacon found himself suddenly alone in his empty house with nothing but the consequences of his actions. He tried calling Freya repeatedly, but she had blocked his number. He drove by Inkwell, only to find the shop closed, a for-lease sign in the window. His inquiries about her whereabouts were met with hostile silence from Imani and other mutual acquaintances. As November progressed, Deacon's mental state deteriorated rapidly. He began drinking heavily, sometimes starting in the morning and continuing through the day. Without work to structure his time and with his personal life in ruins, he grew increasingly unstable, swinging between desperate grief and simmering anger. The man who had once been known for his control and professionalism was now unraveling, unable to accept that his deceptions had cost him everything he valued. In early December 2016, Deacon spiraled further into darkness. Suspended from the police force and drinking heavily, he became obsessed with finding Freya. His detective skills, once used to protect the public, now served a darker purpose. He located her new apartment in a different Seattle neighborhood and began watching from his car, tracking her movements and learning her routines. The surveillance gave Deacon a false sense of control. He convinced himself that if he could just explain everything properly, Freya would understand and forgive him. He tried calling from different numbers, left notes on her car, and once followed her through a grocery store, only to have her threaten to call security. Each rejection only intensified his desperation. On December 17th, while observing Freya's apartment, Deacon noticed she and MIA left with overnight bags. Taking advantage of their absence, he used his police training to pick the lock on her door. He told himself he only wanted to talk, to explain himself when she returned. Inside, he found the apartment half-packed in boxes. On the kitchen counter lay printed emails about a tattoo apprenticeship in Portland and enrollment information for a preschool there. The discovery that Freya planned to leave Seattle permanently triggered something in Deacon's already fragile mental state. The thought of losing all access to Freya and MIA forever shattered what little rational thinking he had left. He spent the night in her apartment, drinking from a bottle he'd brought, surrounded by their belongings, looking at photos of MIA, waiting. On December 18th, Freya returned home with MIA around noon. When she opened the door and saw Deacon sitting in her living room, her body froze. MIA, not understanding the danger, excitedly called out "D" and started toward him. Freya quickly pulled her daughter back, noticing Deacon's disheveled appearance, the empty bottle on the floor, and worst of all, his service weapon on the coffee table. A weapon he shouldn't have while suspended. Freya managed to keep her voice steady, telling MIA there was a drawing she'd forgotten to give their neighbor Emma. She whispered to her daughter to tell Emma the blue bird is back, a code phrase they'd created after Deacon's previous unwanted contact. MIA, sensing her mother's fear despite not understanding it, hurried next door. Once MIA was gone, Freya's calm facade cracked. She demanded Deacon leave immediately. He stood, blocking the door, insisting they needed to talk. His words slurred as he spoke about still loving her, about fixing everything. When Freya tried to move past him to the door, he grabbed her arm. The physical contact escalated the situation instantly. Freya pulled away, shouting at him to let her go. Deacon's grip tightened as his pleas turned to accusations. That she was ruining everything by leaving, that she was punishing him unfairly. When Freya managed to break free and run for the door, Deacon lunged for his gun, not to threaten her but in a desperate, drunken attempt to show his authority. In the struggle that followed, the weapon discharged. The bullet struck Freya in the chest. The sudden silence after the gunshot was broken only by Deacon's shocked whisper, "No, no, no." He caught her as she fell, lowering her to the floor, pressing his hands to the wound as blood spread across her shirt. Neighbors, already alerted by MIA, heard the gunshot and called 911. When police arrived, they found Deacon cradling Freya's body, still talking to her, trying to explain himself long after she had stopped breathing. He offered no resistance as they took him into custody, his eyes vacant, his shirt soaked with her blood. Christmas 2019. 3 years later. MIA, now 6, sits in her grandmother's modest Chicago apartment opening presents. Among them is an envelope containing information about a trust fund established for her education, set up anonymously but with the unmistakable legal thoroughness of Vivian Thorne, who despite her anger at Deacon couldn't bring herself to punish an innocent child for his crimes. In his prison cell, Deacon writes another letter that will never be sent. The pages are filled with explanations and apologies he himself doesn't fully understand. The guards have grown accustomed to these letters, addressed to a little girl who now barely remembers him. In Portland, the tattoo studio where Freya would have apprenticed displays a small memorial plaque beside artwork she'd submitted with her application. The owner sometimes tells new artists about the talented young mother who never got her chance, whose apprenticeship would have provided the stability and creative fulfillment she had sought for so long. The very future that Deacon had promised but failed to give her, taken away forever in a moment of obsession and rage.